Today my guests are Joe Brinkman and Shaun Walker. Guys, how you doing?
Very good, Dave.
You guys are part of the .NET new board, is that right? Or what do they call that? What do you do?
Official title. So, we've both been involved in the .NET New project, which is an open source project for many years, and we're both employees of .NET New Corporation.
Okay. I'm here to talk about Razor. Razor is a brand new product from Microsoft. I don't know if I can call it a product. It's an out-of-band release from Microsoft. And I just learned something yesterday that I've been reading about Razor. I thought it was an ASP.NET MVC thing. And you're telling me that it's not. So let's first of all talk about what is Razor.
So Razor is a, for lack of a better term, a view engine or a templating engine that allows you to take a template that may include both content and code, and to take that and generate out of that ultimately some content. That content may be XML, ASP, HTML, it may be a bunch of different things, but at the end of the day it's just text, right? It takes text and code and generates text.
Okay, and there already is a template engine that ships with Visual Studio, the T4 template engine.
Right.
And there's a lot of other third-party ones as well.
Right, and the magic sauce with like a view engine like the one that comes standard in ASP.NET, the real magic happens in the framework itself, not in the view part, where it knows how to take that template and turn it into code, essentially, and then that code ultimately generates some text at the end of the day. And so with Razor, what they've done is they've done some really smart things about how you delineate code and content, so that you can minimize the number of angle brackets and overhead, and really focus on, this is the HTML that I want to spit out, and I can surround that with a little bit of code because I want to spit that same HTML out for 10 different rows, say in a table or whatever. And so all of that's done in a very concise and sort of intuitive way, so that you're not constantly thinking mentally about the context switch between code and content.
Sure. Anybody that's done any .NET or ASP.NET development, they're familiar with this context switch where you've got the less than percent,
Exactly.
percent. Do those tags have a name? I've never really been
I don't think so.
I
Greater than, less than, yeah.
I call them bee stingers.
Okay,
I hear
that's probably a good name.
Sometimes call them alligator tags.
Yeah.
But anyway, they turn up yellow inside of your IDE.
Right.
Right.
And so Razor does away with that. It just knows when you're switching context.
Right. It has some hints that you provide. Like the @ symbol is a hint to Razor to make that context switch, to say, hey, there's some code coming.
Okay.
And then it has some smarts about the language syntax for VB and the language syntax for C#, so it can infer some information about when it gets to the end of the line, or when it gets to a certain construct, it says, does this construct sort of match the language that I'm in? If not, then probably a context switch is happening, and this next part needs to be text.
Interesting. So this is a couple things you said there I can relate to with other languages. So jQuery, for example, has a $sign.
Yeah.
And it tells you, okay, we're in jQuery mode now,
Right.
and it's a nice, concise, single character that does that. And then I think about T-SQL or any kind of ANSI SQL.
Right.
It just knows. It has no line delimiter character, command end character. It just knows when the line ends.
And Razor is being shipped as part of Web Matrix, which is a IDE which is intended for more breadth developers. So developers who aren't necessarily enterprise level developers. So they're more developers that are productivity developers. They just need to get things done quickly. And Microsoft felt that the current tool set that they have doesn't really cater to that audience very well, and that the current language constructs are a little bit too heavyweight.
Okay.
And so they were looking for something that was a little bit more familiar to them, more like a scripting language like a PHP.
Right.
And so Razor accomplishes that goal.
All right. So Shaun, tell me about .NET. How are you using this in your product?
So we are going to ship Razor support as part of .NET Nuke next week. It's interesting. So in our case, .NET Nuke is a web content management platform. We have the notion of modules which plug into our platform. Modules have always been user controls for as long as we've had sort of support for modules in our platform. User controls can be created using standard ASP.NET techniques, using VB.NET, C#. So what we did when it came to Razor is we utilized the new Razor syntax, so you can actually create a Razor file, and that Razor file can be in VB or in C#, or I guess whatever other languages are going to be supported in the future through Razor. And we passed the Razor file into the Razor View Engine, and it spits out HTML, which we then inject into our page output. So it actually takes the Razor script, passes it through an alternate view engine, whereas the rest of the page would go through the standard web forms view engine, and then it consolidates that all back together into a HTML output for the page. So it basically consolidates the two different view engines together into one. So it's seamless to the end user.
Okay.
For developers, it's quite interesting in that you can create modules using Razor. You can package them up using the standard .NET Nuke techniques. You can ship them to somebody else. They can install them at runtime just like a standard .NET Nuke module.
So is this a tool for module developers, or is it a tool for the people that are using the content?
It's actually applicable to both in the way that we've implemented it.
Right. So our implementation, there's two sides to our implementation. So we have what we call a Razor host module that allows you to run scripts, to run Razor scripts. And so you say, this is the Razor script I want to use right now. And that Razor script may be a Twitter feed, or it may be a Facebook like button, or whatever is the Razor script that you're running at that particular point. And that host module then becomes that like button, or that host module becomes that Twitter feed, that sits on the side. But the host module is reused over and over and over again, and you just change what script happens to be running in any given instance of the module.
Oh, I see.
So where it becomes an end user thing is that the end user can at runtime go in and say, hey, I need this to change a little bit. Think of PHP. When they want to change something on a PHP site, they go in, they alter a text file, a PHP file, and it's just live. It's there right now because it's all being done, interpreted right at runtime. All of that's being done. Well, the Razor View Engine and the way it works in .NET Nuke and the Razor host module, exactly the same. It's not pre-compiled. It is in the sense that ASP.NET compiles it and puts it into temporary storage so it doesn't have to keep recompiling it. But for the most part, I can make the change and it's there. It's on the site. I don't have to hit a compile button. I don't, just to the end user, it's sort of seamless and transparent.
Okay, so the HTML pages are like that in any framework that you don't have to recompile or redeploy anything.
Right.
And even the old templating and web forms and an MVC, those alligator tags, everything inside there, even though it's C# code, you can modify those.
That's
and they
true.
get rerun each time the page is requested.
You can for
It depends on how you set up your project, right? So you would typically have your ASCX, and then you'd have your code behind. So depending on how you had configured your site, you may be able to
you can't change the code behind. The code behind requires a recompile.
Right.
Anything that's actually in the ASCX itself.
Right. So with Razor, everything's in one file.
Okay.
So you have
and that merging. Just to be clear on this. This merging between the template and the code and the static content and the dynamic template, that happens at runtime.
Yes.
Okay. Which is different than a lot of like T4, where there's a step in between, where I consciously I decide, okay, now I want to update my static content that the end user is going to see by right-clicking and saying regenerate this code.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So when we call it a templating engine, it is a templating engine, but not in the way that T4 is. I mean, T4 is better, sort of designed for creating artifacts that you then utilize in certain ways, whereas this truly is more like a programming language, right, where it's interpreted dynamically.
Right.
All right.
And you could think of it as the next step of ASP, if you will, that just tries to simplify and get some of the extraneous angle brackets out of your way and really try to simplify things down to as simple as you can get without losing the context switch between code and content.
And that's the key, right? That's the reason this product even exists. Because
Right.
it serves a need that's already being met by other products, but it serves in a simpler way.
Yes,
Right.
right. It simplifies it.
Right, and it's targeted at a different group of people. When you look at the overall space of developers, right? There's people who are at the higher end who are professional developers, right? These are the guys with the computer science degrees or people who are doing in really high end stuff. But then you have at the lower end people that have traditionally been served by languages like ASP and PHP and VB, where they're really trying to go after people who may not have formal training in programming, but they know enough to get things done that's useful, right? It's like all of those Excel spreadsheets with 10,000 macros in them that literally run most of the large organizations, right? If you
Right.
took their Excel spreadsheets away from them, or in the past their Lotus 1, 2, 3 spreadsheets away from them, the organizations couldn't function.
Right.
Right? Those people aren't trained on how to write macros. They pick it up, they learn how to do it, and it makes stuff work.
And they use the tools that are simplest for them to come up to speed on. So, I mean, I guess in the past they might gravitate towards other languages because Microsoft didn't necessarily have an option for them, whereas Razor might present
Right.
that opportunity.
Right.
I would argue that simplicity is also a benefit to the enterprise development. The experience,
Right.
a guy with a master's degree in computer science, just because he knows how to create the complex Rube Goldberg machine,
Right.
doesn't mean that that's what he should be doing.
Exactly.
Right.
So simplicity has value no matter
Yeah, it has
what
value
area.
for everyone. The other interesting thing with Razor is that because it's going to be the default view engine for MVC, there's a lot of helpers that are being created around, like Razor helpers, and we can utilize those helpers in .NET Nuke as well now. Because
What kind of helpers?
helpers for doing all types of things, like the example that Joe gave was the Twitter helper, right? It's basically one line of code to pull a Twitter feed into your .NET Nuke site.
Oh, nice. I was
Yeah.
thinking, when I think of helpers, I think of like be able to generate a drop-down list. The
Twitter-
Twitter feed
you
is
could
much
do
more
that as
complex
well.
than that.
Right. Well, there's you can go from really super complex, like a Twitter feed or a Facebook feed or any of those, down to the really simple ones. Like if you look at the Razor helpers that are going to ship out of the box, there are some that are as simple as simplifying a drop-down list or simplifying. There's one around doing some image manipulation, so you can take an image and scale it or rotate it and display it.
Nice.
Right, or put a watermark on it. Things that might have taken you, a couple hundred lines of code
Sure.
in 2 or 3 classes to do. If you were coding it all yourself, it's now 1 or 2 lines of Razor syntax code. And we've extended that, and we'll continue to extend that into taking parts of the .NET Nuke API and simplifying them. And making the API more accessible for those commonly used things, right? Instead of having to remember that something is buried down 3 or 4 levels in the namespaces, right? Boil or surface that in a way that's a lot simpler for people to use it.
I see. What's the availability of Razor? Is it available today?
In a beta form, but the actual shipping bits will happen on Thursday.
Thursday. So
Yeah.
by the time this video released, it will be available.
Right.
Yeah.
And what about .NET Nuke? Is that will it be in .NET Nuke on Friday?
Our release is on the 19th?
So our release is
next
on the
Wednesday.
19th.
Yeah.
January 19th. Okay, so this
and
video
so-
will be out after that. So-
Right, so we're doing our official release basically a week after the Web Matrix and Razor launch.
Okay, and help me understand this, because I know there's several. There's there's a paid version of .NET Nuke, and
Right.
there's sort of an open source version of .NET Nuke. I guess they're both open source, but
Right.
um,
Yeah, we have a community edition, which
That's
is
what
the
it is.
free open source version that is accessible to anyone, so you can utilize it. Because it's licensed under an open source license, you can utilize it for commercial and non-commercial use. And then we do have a professional edition. We also introduced an enterprise edition this last summer as well, so we actually have 2 commercial editions
okay.
now.
And will this be available? Will Razor support be available in all 3?
Yes.
Okay.
It'll be available in all editions.
Outstanding. Anything else to tell us?
I think that's it.
All right. You guys have a web presence you want to tell to the masses?
Oh, web presence?
Yeah, www.dotnetnuke.com.
And you have a podcast too, right?
Well, there's one that's done by one of the guys at .NET Corporation called DNN Voice.
Okay.
So dnnvoice.com. So we're going to be getting that more regular here this year. That's one of the focuses.
Okay.
So I'm working with him to help get that back on a regular schedule. And so.
Excellent. All right. Shaun, Joe, thanks so much.
Thanks, Dave.
Enjoy Code Bash, my friends. Come up to speed on .NET Nuke and Razor technology.